Welcome to the Poisoning Podcast. I'm your host, Erin DeLullo. Please like, share, and review this episode. Today, my guest ventures a little off topic, but in the same vein. So, usually we focus on fentanyl, opioids, illicit drugs, alcohol. Today we're talking about food, and I have Dr. Marion Nestle on. She is a leading voice in food policy, and at 88 has authored 15 books and has 3 more coming out in the next year and a half, which is completely impressive. She is at New York University and has a PhD in molecular biology. And she has a lot of interesting things to say, so enjoy the show. Welcome to the Poisoning Podcast, Dr. Nestle.
Glad to be here.
So I am standing here in West Virginia, where we just recently passed legislation to eliminate red dyes. It's a new trend.
It's a hot trend.
It's a hot trend. I like that. I know. I've actually pulled, it's funny, I pulled some legislation. You know, California seems to be the first state to do this, but now we have Texas, West Virginia. I didn't know these states had so much in common.
Secretary of Health and Human Services announcing yesterday that he would like food companies to get rid of 8 different colors.
So more than just red.
Hmm?
Wow. Can you tell us the difference in these dyes and these colors? What should we know about them?
Extracted from petroleum, they're very brightly colored. And companies use them because there's a great deal of evidence that kids in particular think that foods taste better if they're brightly colored.
Really?
They're used for cosmetic purposes. They're absolutely unnecessary, but they help to sell food products, and that's what they're about. And unfortunately, there's been a fair amount of research indicating that some kids who consume these artificial colors develop behavioral problems as a result. There are animal studies that show linkages of some of them to cancer, but the FDA for many, many years has said that they're safe at current levels of intake. But that has not made food advocates very happy. Food advocates have been trying to get rid of them for years. And at last, there's a Secretary of Health and Human Services who agrees with them and is asking food companies to get rid of them. The food companies, by the way, have promised in the past to get rid of them and then reneged on their promise.
Oh, fascinating.
They did some experiments and made cereals without the dyes. Nobody bought them. So they put the dyes back.
So people did not buy the breakfast cereal because the Fruit Loops weren't as colorful.
They weren't as
I guess,
colorful.
dyes made of like beets or blueberries, or, you know, I see these trends on Instagram where it's like, you should make natural dyes for your Easter eggs.
Yeah,
Use a
they're
beet.
paler. The colors are paler, or if you want intense colors, they tend to be browns and tans and yellows. And kids don't like them as much.
Well, we're definitely visual eaters, aren't we?
We are.
Wow. So all these different dyes, the studies that show cancers in animals, does that concern you? How concerned are you with that?
Moderately concerned. I mean, I think it's time these dyes were gone. I just don't think it's the most important nutrition issue in the world. I'm much more concerned about calories because 75% of American adults are overweight or obese, and 30 to 40% of children are overweight or obese. That's a much more important problem, but it's also a much more difficult problem. The thing about the food dyes is that there have been complaints about them for years.
Mm-hmm.
And concerns about them for years. Countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand have managed to get rid of them. And the same companies that are selling foods here are selling foods there without those dyes. So they are fully capable of getting rid of them. The dyes have no purpose beyond cosmetics. They're
Okay.
there to compensate for the fact that the foods aren't based on real food anymore. There's no reason to keep them. And in Europe and some of these other countries, they use what is called the precautionary principle, where if there's any question about harm, they don't get into the food supply. In, uh,
Hmm.
in the United States, we do things differently. They're in the food supply, and then if people get sick, we take them out. And I guess there have been enough concerns about behavioral problems in children, and this is a particular issue for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that he's taken on food dyes. There's an enormous amount of popular support for getting rid of the dyes. The dyes need to be gone.
Well, it's interesting. The people who've been fighting against these dyes long term or longer, right? Would you, and of course, California did this first, much more liberal voting state than, say, where I'm standing in West Virginia, which may have given Trump his highest margin. I'm pretty sure it did. Um, I would not think that those two groups would necessarily come into alignment. So we're seeing like a force of people working together. Am I correct on this?
Now, the way I put it is politics makes strange bedfellows.
It does.
I mean, it's very interesting to me that this has been taken on as a Republican issue. That is unexpected, but I'm really happy to see it be an issue. I love the way everybody is talking about it. I love the idea that somebody at that high level in the administration is talking about chronic disease. And even if he's picked what I consider to be an easy issue,
Yeah.
food colors are easy. They can get rid of them. They should get rid of them. It's a good first step. I hope it
Yes,
is a first step.
there you go. First steps. Because I just pulled numbers from the CDC that, West Virginia had the highest death rate from diabetes in the state, of all the states.
Well, that's
Uh,
an obesity problem
right.
because
But
type 2
should
diabetes.
that should be part of make America healthy again, right?
Oh, you would hope so.
I
Yeah.
mean, do if we had, and this is CDC, like I'll name the top 5 states from this is 2021: West Virginia, Arkansas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, New Mexico. Those are the top 5 states, based on population size where the death was large. So 1,000 people dying in a year from diabetes. I don't know anyone do you think anyone has died possibly from red dyes?
Not that I know of, and that's why I say it's not the most important issue. What it does do is attract children to eating junk food. And what we know about junk food is it makes people eat more of it. It increases calorie intake without people realizing it. So, I'm totally for getting rid of them. I'm totally for it. I think it's great. I'm really glad to. I wish that RFK Jr. had announced some rulemaking or some
Ah,
mandatory or some requirements, but instead he simply asked the food industry to voluntarily get rid of their dyes. And whether they will or not, we'll see.
well, some states are following it.
And the
So,
states may push it. Because if states ban them, then the companies won't be able to sell their products in those states. That's complicated for them. That
yeah, oh,
that
I'm sure
that
in
complicates.
manufacturing, you
Yeah.
don't want to do two types,
No.
right? You want to just streamline your production.
Right. No, I mean, they do different production for different countries in the world because different countries have
Sure.
different rules. But to do that in the United States seems really hard. And so the state laws, especially if the state laws are different, they will force the government to do a national law in order to preempt all of those different kinds of state laws. So I think it's coming, and uh, the food companies who use those dyes have had plenty of warning.
They should see, yeah. tells them something is happening.
Right. Well, and they've had plenty of warning. This is
Yeah.
not the first time this has come up. They've been told for a very long time that people don't like these things.
So what's something else that RFK could do to really
Well,
help
if
make
you want to do
America
something
healthy?
about type 2 diabetes, the most important risk factor for type 2 diabetes is overweight.
Mm-hmm.
Some people with type 2 diabetes diagnoses can lose weight and resolve their symptoms. There's no question that overweight is the primary risk factor for type 2. So you want to prevent overweight. How do you do that? Well, you want to change the way people eat. So one way to do that is to give them enough money to buy food so that they can buy expensive fruits and vegetables and healthier foods. Another is to teach people how to cook. Another is to put restrictions on what food marketers can do. Taxes, warning labels, marketing restrictions, um, bans on certain kinds of foods in schools and institutions. And again, RFK Jr. is trying, and the Secretary of Agriculture have said that they're going to start with putting some restrictions on what SNAP recipients can buy. Again, that's a step. It's not really addressing the larger problem. The larger problem, addressing it means taking on the food industry.
Right.
And whether they're willing to do that or not, I don't know. I don't think that the color additive issue takes on the food industry in a really serious way because there are so many alternatives available and they know how to do it. So it's not really addressing the core issues of what the food industry does, which is to try to sell more of its products, not less. They're not social service agencies, they're not public health agencies, they're businesses. They've got stockholders to please.
So my grandfather just died, like in the last, was it 9 days? He was 102,
Oh,
had a great life. My grandmother died a few years before that at the age of 98. Both very active in what I would call having just normal lives till close to the end. And my grandfather's rule was never to be, I think it was above 170 pounds. Like he had a rule, and they were active, like they weren't running marathons or doing this CrossFit on Instagram. They were gardening. He was like working in the yard, just eh, exercise that had them moving. I only knew them since they were retired. Is that, I mean, it was a blessing to me because I was raised across the street, but they would go to McDonald's once a week before their Wednesday night church service, and they would get a small cheeseburger, a small fry each, and share this apple pie. And I would go, as we would go with them to church, and that's like was like such a treat. But I can barely imagine someone going into McDonald's these days, unless it was for a child, to buy the small cheeseburger, the small fry, and split an apple pie. I just feel like the mindset has changed so much. So when did our chronic obesity really come into play in this country?
started in about 1980, and
Okay.
I mean, the prevalence of obesity was roughly 15%. um, in in the 70s and 60s and 70s. It was slowly growing up, but it went up very sharply between 1980 and 2000, and it went up in parallel with an increase in calories in the food supply and an increase in the number of calories that people were consuming every day. And that happened, I think, for a couple of reasons. The main one was a change in the way that Wall Street evaluated corporations. Up until then, There were blue chip corporations like IBM that
Hmm.
gave very long, slow returns on investment. And IBM and companies like Ford paid their workers decently. Ford wanted his workers to be able to buy their own cars, the cars they were making. Um, IBM was a generous company to work for. And in 1981, Jack Welch, who was the head of General Electric, made a very influential speech in which he said that corporations only had one purpose, and that was to make money for their investors, and that
Mm.
any other purpose they needed to stop. And that was when companies stopped paying their workers, moved their manufacturing out of the United States into places where things could be made more cheaply. Every decision that the corporations made was aimed at increasing profits. And for food companies, this was exceptionally difficult because we were already producing twice as many calories in the food supply as the population needed. And the number of calories in the food supply increased from 1970 to 2000, from about 3,000 to 4,000 a day. Companies had to sell that. And they did that, food companies did that by putting food in places where it never was before. Libraries, coffee shops, and all of a sudden there were coffee shops in bookstores. When I was
Yeah.
growing up, you couldn't bring anything to eat into a library or bookstore because they were afraid you would mess up the books.
They're
Um,
making bigger margins on the coffee drinks.
they're making bigger margins on the coffees. And the other thing that happened was the portion sizes got bigger.
Mm.
And if I had one concept that I wish everybody understood, it's that larger portions have more calories.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. It's not intuitively obvious. And as people started eating bigger portions, they loved it. Calorie intake increased. People got fatter. End of story.
So do we need food education?
Oh,
Like
yes.
I mean, I feel like this is
Yes.
something that should be taught because one of my little pet peeves, and no one is perfect, right? No one is perfect. But having children these days, I saw kids coming to school, like my son's classmates, with those pureed pouches. They were like in the fourth grade and they're just sucking on a sweetened pureed pouch of, like, why couldn't you just put grapes in the lunchbox? Do you need to puree them and put apple juice and
Make sure they're really sweet. Make
no.
sure they're really, really sweet. Yeah, I mean, these are ways of selling food products. This is not about nutrition. This is about selling food products. So they're really good at it. One way you do that is by convincing kids that this is what they're supposed to be eating. They're supposed to be eating products, not food. Food is boring. Meals are boring. Things in packages are what you're supposed to eat. They taste better, they like them better, and never mind the calories.
Well, yes, I agree. Never mind the calories. So we need food education for children. And I don't know that we'll get it. Maybe we can start that as MAHA on the state level. But I want to ask you about chronic versus infectious diseases and how healthy do you need to be? Because I think RFK, I mean, says if you, or maybe implies, I'll say implies, I'll give grace. Um, if your vitamin levels are up, you may not get the measles, COVID. We could name things. And, COVID was a shock to our society. Maybe it wasn't to my grandfather, who amazingly survived it. He had seen a lot of things in his century of living. So what is your viewpoint on the vitamins versus for
No question that if you want to prevent measles, the only way to do it is to be vaccinated. And there's a history of decades of vaccination of preventing measles, and the idea that measles is coming back is just absolutely shocking to me. I mean, I'm old enough so I can remember that before vaccination, when kids died of measles, or they got so sick that they never recovered. And measles is one of those things where if anybody near you has it and you haven't been vaccinated, you're going to get it. And you're lucky if you don't get really, really sick. And when I was a kid, I was out of school for months in the fifth grade. I remember that when I was 10 years old, I had mumps, I had whooping cough, I had
Wow.
all the childhood diseases that year. I hardly went to school. And the idea that one vaccination can stop that seems incredible to me. Why wouldn't you want it?
You
You know,
had the mumps and you had whooping cough.
I had mumps in the same year. Um, and and RFK Jr. is not wrong about the importance of vitamin A. In developing countries, the first thing you do if somebody has measles is you give them a vitamin A shot or you give them a pill. And then you give them another pill the next day, and then you stop because you've given them enough. And kids who are treated that way with vitamin A recover from measles much better than kids who don't get that. But vitamin A doesn't prevent measles.
Mm.
It just means that the kids do better. So he's not totally wrong about vitamin A. It's just the sequence isn't right and the amounts aren't right. And the
Mm.
idea that there are kids in Texas and New Mexico who are presenting to doctors with vitamin A toxicity is
Yeah.
just shocking to me. Because the only way you can get vitamin A toxicity is from pills, supplements, or cod liver oil, or whatever it is that he's recommending because it has so much. Just eating food wouldn't do that. So this is distorting the idea of healthy nutrition. Yeah, I mean, everybody should have enough of the vitamins they need, but food usually does that.
And that's another issue where people, you know, we have a lot marketed to us today. And I'm not going to lie, I take some vitamin supplements. I work with a functional doctor who's a little more holistic and, he checks levels like vitamin D. And in the winter, I supplement with some vitamin D drops and take a multivitamin and a few things like that. But when did that start replacing science-based medicine and vaccines?
Oh, I think people have always loved supplements. I don't know anybody who thinks they eat a healthy diet. And if you don't think you eat a healthy diet, then supplements seem like a terrific way of ensuring it. And as soon as vitamins were invented, companies started and were able to be synthesized so that you could get them cheaply. Companies started selling them and people started buying them. And you go to a drugstore or a grocery store, and there are aisles filled with supplements.
Oh, sure.
What's so interesting about them to me is that 50, 60, 70% of American adults take supplements, and there's almost no evidence that they make healthy people healthier, but they make people feel better. And I think the idea that they make people feel better is important. People need to be made to feel better. And
Sure.
in today's day and age, anything that makes you feel better is a good thing. Um, so I don't object to them too much. There's very, very little evidence for benefit. There's very, very little evidence for harm, except in
Okay.
the case of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A. And even then, it used to be that the only people who had vitamin A toxicity were people who ate polar bear liver. There weren't very many of them.
I don't know if you could get anyone to eat that
You
today.
don't see it in your local grocery store.
No, not hard to get.
No. So the idea that people are taking, all these supplements seems unfortunate. People think that if they take one, more is better. That if a one a day is good, then five one a days is better.
Oh,
It's not. I
oh,
mean,
yeah.
so that one important concept about supplements is that less is better.
Good to know. I want to go back to children for a moment. So we have food marketing to children, and I've seen in states that we're now limiting how, say, vaping can be marketed to children. Like, I'm sure bright colors are used. Actually, I'll put this
Flavors,
in the
flavors.
Substack this week. I just saw someone in the addiction space. He teaches kids, middle schools to stay away from drugs because of fentanyl and everything that, can, I mean, yes, they can kill you, but also they can just get you addicted, which ruins your life. And some of the children in middle school came and handed him their vapes, and they were all colorful, Dr. Nussel, all colorful. So do you think we have, and flavored, right? Like cotton candy or I don't know, something that you wouldn't think like a 45-year-old man would necessarily be
Well,
attracted
these are
to.
being marketed to kids.
So do you think we can have certain foods? Can we limit the marketing of foods to
We
children?
could. Whether we're going to or not is
Okay.
another matter.
Okay, is
But
it
we certainly,
practical to expect that we can?
not in the next 3 years.
Okay.
I mean, I'll be
Yeah.
surprised if, I think the Make America Healthy Again movement is very important and I'm very excited about it, but I want to see it do something. And so far, it's only doing talk.
It's only doing talk.
It's only doing talk.
Okay.
Even the color additives it's talk. We have a deal with food companies. Food companies have said they're going to do this. We trust food companies to do it. There's not much evidence that approach is going to work. So where's the rulemaking? Where's the legislation? Where is the threat? If you don't do it, we're going to do this. If you don't do it, we're going to take action. Where's that? We're not even hearing that. So
Yeah,
I'm
it's
very concerned that nothing is going to happen. I'd like to see something happen. I think the ideas are right. And even if they're distorted because the science isn't exactly um, the way the science actually is, and it's based on grains of truth, at least for a lot of it, it's headed in the right direction. Some of it is not. And I would say the focus on getting rid of fluoride is not a good idea, and neither is the opposition to vaccinations. Those are public health measures. The grains of truth, there are, in fact, occasional problems with vaccinations.
mm-hmm.
There are errors, there are problems, but mostly it works. With fluoride, again, the grain of truth is if there's too much fluoride, it's not good for you. But most water supplies keep the fluoride at safe levels. So, where do you want to go on that? I
Yeah,
think
no, it's very
I think you
interesting to see
I
what
think
they'll
you make
do.
I think you make stricter regulations about the safety of amounts. That's what you do. And you keep it there because it kept kids from, practically put dentists out of business when they introduced fluoride.
Really.
Kids didn't have cavities in their teeth anymore.
Hmm.
It was an enormous public health intervention. But you're worried about too much fluoride? Worry about too much fluoride is completely reasonable. Do something about it. Make sure that
Yeah,
that
I would maybe
that
from
water
my
supply.
standpoint, I think diabetes is a bigger problem
Absolutely.
in our country. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's funny, tale of two grandfathers. One lives to 102, active, till a few months before he dies. Another grandfather died of diabetes complications like 25 years ago. And then two of his children, one of which is my parents, now both have diabetes, but their lifestyle choices Maybe they would have had it all along. Maybe it's a gene, but their lifestyle choices of what they ate, working out, didn't, help them in fighting it off.
These things are complicated mixtures of genetics and lifestyle and environment, and um, people have to make their own choices about these kinds of things. And I don't tell people what to do.
No,
You know,
sure.
I mean,
I
I can
just
tell
think
you
we should
I can tell
focus
you
on.
what I do, but
Please do.
well, I follow my own dietary advice and try to stay active. No, it's and try to keep busy. I've got lots to do. Do I have good genetics? I don't know. And my mother lived to 83 and died of breast cancer, and
Mm,
my father had a heart attack at 47 and died
wow.
at that age. So I don't know. Was I lucky enough to get some sort of genetic whatever? I think there's a lot of luck in it, and some of it is good nutrition.
D-
So,
Has your new has your nutrition changed? Your viewpoint on it? Like when you were younger, did you eat more or would you
oh,
eat
I ate
things that
more.
you wouldn't eat now?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly did. And also, I raised my kids before I began to get involved in nutrition. And
Mm.
so I think I would say the big change was to be much more plant forward and, to substitute plant foods for a lot of the meat I was eating. But I still eat meat. I'm an omnivore, and I still eat meat. I just don't eat so much. One of the things about getting older is you can't eat as much as you used to. I
I'm
mean,
finding that out and I
I,
don't like it.
it really takes the fun out of it, let me tell you. I mean, I remember when I was young, I could knock off a pizza. Not a huge one, but I could knock off a pizza. Now, no, not a chance. Um, so I have to, in a sense, be more careful not to make sure that I'm getting the nutrients that I need. But food has so much in the way of nutrients. I don't take supplements. I
Oh,
don't.
good to know.
I don't.
Now, if you're going to have a processed food, what would be like a treat for you when you
Oh,
eat one?
I really like ice cream.
Oh, well, I think a
I,
lot of Americans would agree
I
with you on that.
really do. I really do. And there's a brand that I can sometimes find in stores that makes a ginger ice cream that's to die for.
Ooh,
It's
that's
really good.
interesting.
It's really good. I like it. So that's my favorite junk food.
Good to know. Well, congratulations on your work. You are 88 and
I
you have
am. I
two
am.
books coming out in June. Is that correct?
No, one in June and one in November,
One in June and one in November. Sorry.
and one
I
the
was
following year.
I hope that I am working that long and excited about the work I do. What,
I hope you are too. It's kind of fun.
well, thank you for joining the poisoning, Dr. Nassau.
Why do you call it the poisoning?
Oh, wow, good question. So, the poisoning, I mostly focus on illicit drugs because
Ah,
people don't, especially young people, do not know. They think they're getting a Xanax or a Percocet off the street, and it's laced with fentanyl. And fentanyl will kill you immediately. And it's the biggest killer of like 18 to 40-year-olds. Not diabetes, not gun violence, not car wrecks or airplanes, fentanyl.
it's great you're doing that.
Thank you. So, but I try to explore other things, vaping, alcohol, food. There's a lot to be concerned about.
Terrific. Anyway, thank you for having me on.